Okay, so this is the game testing presentation for the game testing of Fall Guys, presented by me, Kylo Goings, and my partner, Catherine Asbill. So, again, our game of choice is Fall Guys Ultimate Knockouts, basically a free-to-play platformer battle royale where 40 players compete against each other in 3 to 6 rounds in platform-type maps to see who comes out on top. So it's across all platforms, but for testing purposes, we're using the PS5 and we're using the PC for our testing.
Hi, it's Catherine. So the design of the test, we have some dependent variables. So we record each round that they qualified, the position of each round, the map played, and how long the session was. And the controls we have is that they will play one round on the PlayStation 5 controller and then one round on a keyboard and mouse. And then afterwards, we're going to do the post survey where they answer about their age, their skill, their preferences, and how much they enjoyed playing on each input method and if they would play Fall Guys again. And we're testing to see if the player skills has a direct correlation with their enjoyability and their preferences.
So let's dive into our research questions. So our first research question are asking, will the players who are casual gamers have less fun than immersive gamers due to the skill level needed to complete the game? So we actually found that casual gamers are, first off, our hypothesis is that casual gamers were going to have less fun just because of the skill set that was required to compete and to qualify for rounds. We did find that across the board, most of our players were average. They ranked themselves from 1 to 5. So most players that we tested ranked themselves somewhere between a 3, which would be like your average everyday player, to like a 5, which would be like the higher level or immersive players. We did find that across the board for keyboard and mouse, most players didn't actually enjoy playing it in keyboard and mouse. So that really tells us that even though most of our players were of a higher skill set, they didn't really find it more enjoyable when they were using keyboard and mouse. However, a majority, almost I would say 90% of our results, is that most people actually enjoyed playing the game when it came to the controller. So we did see for the most part that skill set doesn't always directly correlate with the enjoyment of the game, just as much as the controls are a correlation to how much the person actually enjoys playing the game on the controller versus playing with the keyboard or the mouse. So the next research question, presented by Kat,
is does the player skill level correlate with the enjoyment of the game and their preferred gaming console? Which there is a positive correlation between this, because another thing that we noticed during the testing period was that when they were using the keyboard and mouse, they would get significantly harder maps. These were maps like they were called like the Fall Guys developer team maps, and they were much harder to actually qualify in. So there was a lot more gameplay time when players were playing on controller. They would get further, they could get to the last round at least and try to get the crown and win the game, versus when they were playing on keyboard and mouse, they would get disqualified after 2 or 3 rounds. Most players didn't make it to actually try to win the match and get to the crown. So the input and the skill level, and with the changing kind of maps, there's definitely a correlation there between their skill.
Okay, so our next research question was, will immersive players be more likely to continue playing the game in the future compared to the casual gamers? So we hypothesized that immersive gamers are going to be more likely to continue playing just because of the level of skill needed to play the game compared to casual players who, based on a different data set, didn't really play these types of games, so we figured that they wouldn't enjoy these experiences going forward. So it seems like that the likelihood, again, for players of a higher skill set to continue playing the game is more or less average. So we did see that most players rank somewhere between like a 3 and a 5, 5 being most definitely going to go play it like right now, and 3 being like, I would definitely try it again, but just maybe some other time in the future. So looking at our results, we do see that it's around the same amount based on the skill level of the player directly correlates to their likelihood of continuing to play the game. So that does prove our hypothesis that there is kind of a direct correlation to that the more immersive players are going to be more likely to play it than the average players, just because of literally the results being the same for both questions across the board. So we're going to hop into the I'm sorry.
I was going to the observations and limitations. So what we would change about the test. So we noticed that most of the players struggle with using the keyboard and mouse, and with the maps also being harder with the keyboard and mouses, the casual players would they would qualify less than the higher players. So when they felt like they weren't going to win, they would start to give up. They wouldn't try as hard to actually qualify in the round. So enjoyability was definitely higher playing with the controller versus the mouse and keyboard.
So some of the limitations that we found in our testing was, one, the amount of time that the players had. So from testing, the game really doesn't give you a tutorial. We found that there was definitely more of a trial and error aspect when players would play the game, because they weren't used to the controls for keyboard and mouse. They didn't understand how to play the game from that perspective. With a controller, they're a little bit more used to the layout, so it did make it a little bit easier as a learning curve for them to figure it out, but it didn't make the game any easier because they still didn't know what the proper controls were before playing the game. The other thing was people, because all players have different skill sets and they have different amounts of time that they spend on playing games. So across the board, we couldn't create a consistent variable for how skilled each of our players are going to be. The construct threat is that the keyboard and mouse is just designed completely differently. And with that, the keyboard and mouse also gave you higher maps, which was a factor that we didn't have control over. So that being the case, it definitely would probably make it better knowing that if they're going to get more difficult maps, that maybe we should have given them possibly more time, or possibly maybe giving them a little bit more feedback for how to play it with the keyboard and mouse. Since they're going to be playing on more difficult maps, they would have definitely needed that time to figure it out.
So with some alterations that we would want to do, so we were tracking like which map names that go into each session, and we didn't give them any actual instruction on how to play the game, and we only tested one game for each kind of input type. So now that we've done the testing, some changes that we would do would give the player some practice before actually conducting the test, tracking only the number of rounds played for controller and keyboard and the mouse, and then going through multiple sessions with the controller, with each controller type, finding that this is a trial and error kind of game. Like, you get better as you play.
So really, in conclusion, our first hypothesis we confirmed, because we saw that casual players definitely enjoyed the game less unless they used the controller. For our second hypothesis, we kind of debunked that almost all the players enjoyed the game with the controller due to the decreased difficulty. So skill level was really not much of a factor when it came to enjoyability. And then for our third hypothesis, across the board, we saw that most players, about 80% of players, were likely to continue playing Fall Guys. And for the people that said no, were ranked less in player skill. So these are people that really wouldn't even enjoy playing these types of games in the first place. So they definitely are going to go for a no in the future. With that really concludes our entire testing presentation. Thank you for your time, and take care.